Paul always suspected King Crab was more of a title than a name. And he wants to be the first human to bend the claw. Because one day, the crustaceans will rise, and only Paul will be spared. Foresight's a wonderful thing. Invest in innovation, including 3D printing, with Opto.
Welcome, Edwin. It's great to have you back on the show. How are things?
Hayden, life's been doing great. I'm so excited to be back for the third time on Opto.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to having you. I should say, for anyone new to the podcast or that hasn't seen or listened to any of the interviews with Edwin so far, we'll link those previous episodes down in the episode description so you can get a bit more detail on Edwin's process and what he's all about. But today, I think we'll start with how it all began for you. You have a fascinating story, and one story in particular I'm keen to cover is your experience with Care.com. What initially sparked your interest in the stock market and short selling in particular, and how did this interest evolve into a passion for uncovering fraudulent activities in companies?
So, Hayden, I've been passionate about the stock market from a very young age, like second grade, just obsessed with stocks. Now, the transition to the short side happened more freshman year of college when just by coincidence, I got introduced to two of the biggest people on the short side. Mark Kahota is an independent short seller, and Jim Carruthers, someone who ran $1 billion short only fund called Sophos. And they kind of become my early mentors in college and show me the ropes and how to dig into companies. And summer after freshman year, I go home, and one of my friends had been a babysitter on this publicly traded babysitting platform called Care.com. And she said, you should look into the platform because something seems odd about them. I don't think they're doing the safety checks they claim to be doing. She had been having a few bad experiences, and my friends knew I was good at looking into public companies. So I just start digging around Care.com, and I look at local news reporting, and there's a ton of local news stories of parents hiring babysitters from Care.com who later did a bad job or maybe even had criminal histories. And there was a bunch of litigation against Care.com claiming that they weren't doing their background checks, but none of it was getting like a lot of attention. These were just one-off small things in local courts or local media. And I thought this is a big issue. The whole point of a babysitting platform is you need to make sure the babysitters are safe and they are who they say they are. This is integral to the platform. So
Right.
I start looking into it myself and decide to test out Care.com's vetting process by trying to sign up as Harvey Weinstein. So I use a photo of Harvey Weinstein, I make up an email address, I make everything up, and I consent to their background check, and I document this all. And they say, we'll get back to you in 48 hours. And I think there's no way they approve me as Harvey Weinstein to be a babysitter on Care.com. But sure enough, 48 hours later, hello, Harvey, you've been approved. And I started being able to lie about other stuff. I said, as Harvey Weinstein, I was CPR certified and I was verified and this and that. And I started applying to real babysitting jobs. And I'm like, they're clearly not. And I do this as Donald Trump and Daffy Duck, and I do a bunch of fake accounts. And they're just like, they're claiming to run background checks. In some cases, they're charging parents for background checks, but then they don't appear to be actually doing the background checks. And that more or less starts this war with me and the company that, goes on for 2 years and ends with a big Wall Street Journal report highlighting their safety issues. It cites me a little, and that kind of gave me the credibility I needed to eventually launch my newsletter, The Barricade, that now focuses on the same type of corporate misconduct.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, it's such an interesting story. I mean, before we move on from that story, you faced significant pushback. You kind of alluded to it there from Care.com themselves, including a complaint to your university. A private investigator, I think, was sent to your house. How did you handle that pressure, and what kept you motivated to continue your investigation?
I like to say sometimes youth is an advantage where, if you were an established adult with kids and everything, then that might be scary. But when you're young, you got nothing to lose and you don't know better. So, you kind of think you're invincible. So I don't think I fully grasped all the risks there. I didn't have much to lose other than maybe getting kicked out of college, but I don't think they can do that just from me writing articles. So those were some real benefits. now it's a little more scary. And, if anything, that type of behavior maybe be more intimidating to me now, but I know how to kind of hedge against it. But being young, having nothing to lose, being fearless, that all makes it like a lot more fun and doable.
Yeah, fantastic. And your work gained significant media attention, including a front page story in the Wall Street Journal. How important do you think media coverage is in holding these sorts of companies accountable, and how do you leverage it in your investigative work?
So I think media coverage is extremely, extremely, extremely important. Thomas Jefferson famously said he'd rather have a society with newspapers and no government than government without newspapers. And I think that's very true. If you look at almost all big regulatory actions, or politicians grilling or executives for misconduct, almost always it's like media reporting that sparks it. They're referring to media reporting in the footnotes. There's media reporting. Sometimes Barricade has even been cited in one or two things. So it's like media reporting is kind of essential to the whole process of holding people in power accountable. I think there's like a lot of power in numbers too. Where you can ignore one consumer complaint or 10, but you can't ignore a Wall Street Journal reporter calling and like asking questions. So I think it's extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think it's tough to get. Like, one of my frustrations with the media, a little, Hayden, is there seems to be like a lot of groupthink where one person will write about Nikola rolling a truck down the hill, then everybody, and it becomes the biggest thing ever. And I feel like oftentimes media has a tough time differentiating between like slightly bad conduct and like egregiously terrible conduct. And it kind of just all gets like sauced into one bucket. Like, this company is bad, but they're not as good at dealing with like different severity or thinking for themselves. So that would be like maybe one frustration I have with the media process.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another reason to go to the Bear Cave then, who, I mean, within that publication, very good at making that distinction. Your findings eventually, if we just kind of close off that care.com story, your findings lead to the kind of major implications for the company, including resignations. I think they're to improve some of their safety practices as well. Talk to us about how it felt to kind of see the tangible impact of your work, and how has this experience influenced your approach to investigating other companies as well?
So, like, during this care.com conflict, I became obsessed with them. And like you alluded to earlier, I realized like media coverage was essential, especially in this like public interest issue of bad babysitters or like criminal babysitters. So I cold emailed like over 100 reporters. The Wall Street Journal eventually got interested. Gregory Zuckerman had this front page story where care.com babysitters who had criminal histories were approved to babysit on the site, and later 8 times kids died in their care of these babysitters who had past histories, were either banned from babysitting, had DUIs, or sex offenders. Just terrible. And that led to the CEO resigning, the CFO resigning, the general counsel resigning, the entire management team was replaced. Ultimately, it was sold to IAC at a big discount. I even like started attacking some of the administrators that were investigating me, and I registered a site, theymustresign.com, to go after all the people I feel like were investigating me over the care.com stuff. And, that got me really excited. And, yeah.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, we spoke to a short seller a long time ago now, by the name of Fahmi Kadir.
Yeah.
You may have spoken to her yourself. And I was just interested to understand, like, because there were some consistencies in both the interviews that you've given in the past and the one that we're having now, and that conversation we had with Fahmi. And is this a vocation in a certain sense? Like, yes, short sellers go into it, I suppose, with the objective of making money at the end of the day. But does there have to be an element of vocation and passion for identifying and closing down ultimately bad businesses?
I think the best short sellers definitely have this sort of passion, because frankly, there's a lot easier ways to make money in the market than being a short seller. If you look at all the richest investors, none of them are short sellers. Mark Cahotas likes to say it's like a genetic defect to holding people accountable. And oftentimes these short sellers will continue to be kind of involved in the story even after it's like already played out. So Mark Cahotas, who was a mentor who did a lot of exposing of corruption at MiMedx. He continued to go after the company even after like he was no longer involved in the stock, trying to hold Parker accountable and get the CEO sentenced to prison time. So I think for a lot of people, it's like this real passion thing. And I think everybody wants media attention. It just can be like tough to get it. Media can be like very fickle. Every journalist is getting like a whole 100 cold email pitches every day. But yeah, I think everybody is trying to hold the bad actors accountable. And more, you're seeing this shift towards like activist short sellers being their own media arm. So if you look at like Muddy Waters, they have their Zeros TV channel. They're sending out text alerts when new things go live. They're almost functioning like a media company. All the big activist short sellers have huge email lists. They're putting out press releases. In some ways, with Hunter Brook, itself, which was a recent hedge fund that launched, they literally just have like a nonprofit media newspaper arm where they're like trading off stories of their own media company. So I think we're seeing more and more, not just do short sellers want to hold bad actors accountable by going to the media and writing these reports, but they themselves are becoming their own media companies.
Yeah, completely. No, that makes complete sense. As some of these companies having essentially their own sort of PR operation that assists with the investment discovery. I mean, with that in mind, then maybe that's a good segue to move on to your process for identifying bad businesses. I'm keen to understand that process in both the discovery phase, but also your analysis once you've got an initial idea or a company you're initially interested in. I've heard you discuss the use of Freedom of Information Act requests to gather information on companies, particularly for consumer complaints. So to start, perhaps you can just walk us through a specific example where an FOIA request led to you uncovering significant issues within a company.
Oh, so this happens all the time. My bread and butter is filing FOIA requests with state level regulators for consumer complaints against the company. One example from early on in the newsletter's history, I think this is going back to like 2021, is The Joint. They were a franchisor of chiropractic clinics. The stock went from 10 to 100. They were trading at 40 times earnings. Everybody thought this franchisor of chiropractic clinics had a ton of room to grow. The franchisees were healthy. They were going to keep expanding. This was going to be a huge untapped growth story. They were doing fantastic. And just by going online and like searching reviews for The Joint Chiropractic in their very franchise location, so I was seeing like a lot of complaints, especially around billing. So I'm like, this seems interesting. So I start filing FOIA requests with state level regulators. For example, I might send a FOIA request to the Illinois State Attorney General and say, hey, can I have all consumer complaints filed against The Joint Chiropractic in the last 3 years? And then depending on the state and the laws and the speed of the office, you should get a PDF with a bunch of complaints back in the next few weeks. And I do that for kind of every state they have major operations in. I get a few hundred pages of complaints, and it's appalling. It's just over and over again, people saying that The Joint enrolled them in some like monthly auto renewal feature for like unlimited chiropractic sessions when they only intended to have one. And there's people like that are so infuriated at this monthly charge that they go back into their Joint location, demand to see the contract and see that their signature has been forged. And they're taking photos and they're sending that to regulators saying, hey, I never even signed this contract and now they're just billing me monthly. This was also in the pandemic. So the company would say, hey, if you want to cancel like the auto billing policy, you need to go into the location where you like signed up. But if the location was closed, you'd have no way of canceling. And people are like, there's no way for me to cancel. Even then, they wouldn't let you cancel. They'd make you pause the subscription. And then with The Joint, that kind of became a huge issue. And there was a bunch of other issues there as well that the market just wasn't picking up on. And I like to say that there's a lot of things companies can do that are short-term profitable, but in long term destroy the value of the business. And enrolling people in unwanted monthly like chiropractic things when they only intended to get one session is a great way to boost the short-term profitability. It's not a good way to build like a multi-billion-dollar business. And that stock later fell 90% plus. The other example that I love to tell, Hayden, that a lot of listeners probably know about is Planet Fitness. So everybody, a lot of people go to the gym and have gym subscriptions, and gym subscriptions are notoriously tough to cancel. And, I was reading a little bit about Planet Fitness and seeing like some chatter of consumer complaints there. And, a lot of people are saying Planet Fitness is difficult to cancel. So before filing the FOIA request, I want to like just see what their policy is. What is Planet Fitness's policy around cancellation? And you read the policy, and they say you can't cancel over the phone, you can't cancel online, you can't cancel in the app. You need to cancel by going in person to the location you signed up at, which is already a little like, this is 2024, you can't cancel over the phone or on, like it's already a little backwards. So I want to see like what are people complaining about? So I file FOIA requests in every state for consumer complaints against Planet Fitness, and I get thousands of pages of complaints. And what was happening, at least as these complaints allege, is even when people would go into Planet Fitness franchisees, and Planet Fitness has roughly 2,000 franchisee locations across the country, they go in to cancel, and they'll be told, you can't cancel today. This is a payment processing day. Come back another day. Or they'll go in, they'll cancel, they'll fill out the form, but they'll still continue being billed. So it's like, this is really egregious. And one thing you tend to see in companies that have a lot of egregious billing is you see a lot of credit card disputes. However, Planet Fitness and some bad businesses circumvent that by not letting you sign up with credit cards and instead demanding you sign up with debit cards or direct account ACHs. So you can't even have a dispute mechanism to dispute the complaints. Things like, Planet Fitness policies, if you move to a different city and can't go to the location you signed up, you should send a letter. People are sending letters and sending letters and sending a third letter. And then they're being told by the management of a location, hey, we have too many letters. We can't find your cancellation letter. Just send us another letter. Wait till the end of the quarter and we'll refund you. They're sending certified letters so the company can't deny that they received the cancellation letter. And then they're sending copies of the certified letter to the state attorney general to try to get this subscription canceled. If you go on Planet Fitness YouTube videos, oftentimes in the comments section, you'll see complaints from like bank employees at like local credit unions, mainly targeting lower income demographics, talking about how the number one things people complain about at these credit unions in low income areas is people who just can't cancel their Planet Fitness accounts. And what they'll do is they'll just cancel their bank account and reopen an identical bank account that Planet Fitness doesn't know about. And this is the type of stuff it's tough to like imagine in your head and get just from online. But once you start filing FOIA requests and you see the complaints and you see like the pain in people, that gives you a lot of insight. And I think it's like kind of signature bear cave style of trying to understand a company's relationship with the customer, trying to find hard evidence, stuff that is more than just rumor, and then showing that to people when it's most egregious.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a couple of follow-up questions then. I mean, I'm keen to understand firstly how you go about kind of based on all of that source material, quantifying and analyzing these complaints to determine if they do actually point to a larger systemic issue, or maybe if they're more contained or anomalous than that, what the kind of threshold for that is. My kind of second adjoining question is, are you using AI or any tools like that to actually help process all of this information? You talked about thousands of pages of FOIA requests. I mean, it seems like a pretty manual job. It'd be interesting to understand whether you're using any tools to help get through all of that.
So to your first question, how do you quantify it, right? Any company with 1 million customers is going to have a few slip-ups, even if they're trying to act ethically. Sometimes when you're lucky, there'll be like a government database you can refer to. So two companies that you've done research on in the past is Root Insurance, a car insurance company that was overcharging customers, and Globe Life, a life insurance company that had a lot of complaints around like irregular payouts and unwanted marketing and the like. And for them, there's actually the National Association of Insurance Commissioners that oversees, certain complaints, and they publish a database where you can see every insurance company, the number of closed and confirmed complaints against that insurance company, and the ratio of complaints that they have relative to their size. And you can do that, and they even publish an index where you'll see like the number of expected complaints is like 1 or like 1 per whatever. And they'll show the complaints below that index, meaning better than their peer group, and the complaints, companies with complaint rates above that index. And like in one case, Globe Life was like 6 times above the number of expected complaints you'd have for a company of its size. Root Insurance was like 3 times above. Now, so like you can look at a database. Maybe if you wanted, you could like FOIA the competitors and see how egregious it is. And sometimes I do that, especially if I'm just starting to look at an industry, send FOIA requests to multiple companies and see what comes back. I though, especially now that I've done this a lot, I like going with more of like a gut instinct approach where, you know, it's like, you know, if you're screwing over uneducated populations, Spanish speaking populations, low income populations, whatever, you're just going to have less complaints. Like it's like those people are much less likely to complain than somebody who's like college educated, earning a lot of money, who understands like how to stand up for themselves a little better.
Right.
Like when I look at root insurance, I saw a complaint from somebody who was a lawyer representing the Latino speaking community, writing a regulator saying, hey, every day somebody Spanish speaking comes into my office. They don't know what to do. They're getting overcharged on this policy. Like, can you please help us? That is to me worth like 100 times of other complaints. And a lot of complaints are frivolous. So usually it's more of a gut instinct approach. Read it all manually so I can understand it. So, you know, sometimes look for a government database, see maybe online scores on Trustpilot and SiteJabber compared to peers, but really it's looking at it myself. And to your second question of AI, the simple answer is no. I like reading it myself. I want to be as close as humanly possible to the actual complaint and understanding what's going on. And I feel like when you used AI to summarize, like, I think there's so many ways things can get like twisted in statistics and summaries, right? Like you could have an AI like send FOIA requests on every company, get all the complaints, and make an index of the number of pages of complaints for each company. But that would be misleading because sometimes there's a document that has 100 pages, but it's completely like irrelevant and just somebody complaining about nonsense. You know, it's like, you know, AI, I think for this like more advanced stuff, you want to like read it yourself. You don't want it outsourced to AI. Sometimes the only way I've been using AI recently is there's this tool, Edwin SEC, that does AI summaries of earnings calls. And I find that really helpful. So instead of spending an hour reading that, you can spend 5 minutes to get the high level like idea. But when it comes to this stuff that no one else is looking at, that I kind of view as maybe my edge, I want to look at it myself. I want to intimately understand it. And then you can pick up on like really small nuances that AI might miss. Like, you know, one time a company was asked, respond within 15 days. Sometimes the regulator forwards complaints to, you know, responses to companies. And if the company asks for an extension on the last day and then like takes 2 months and then has some nonsense response, that's like really important context that maybe an AI wouldn't pick.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good example to set that in context. In terms of, well, maybe if we move through your process then and try and understand some other kind of signals that might indicate some kind of bad intent on behalf of a business. I think in another interview, you talk about observing kind of cluster buying among executives, especially in microcap companies. So perhaps you can elaborate on how you use that information to gauge a company's health and potential issues.
So, you know, sometimes if I'm looking at long ideas, and I do invest a little bit on the long side, I like to see cluster buying, where if you just have, I think one person buying or selling can be like overrated. People can do that for all sorts of reasons. I would rather see 5 different executives each buy $10,000 of stock than one executive buy $100,000 of stock. Even though the number is greater, I think when you get that buy-in from a lot of different people, especially if there are a lot of different parts of the organization, if they're the board, their CEO, if they're a different C-suite executive, that to me is an extremely strong sign. Likewise, you know, if you see a lot of selling from different executives, that's a red flag. So if a CEO or somebody sold half their personal holdings, obviously that's not a good sign. But to me, that wouldn't be screaming bad. However, if you see 5 different people each sell half their holdings, then that piques my interest a lot. I also spend a lot more time looking at resignations, because selling some stock might be a sign that, you know, you don't believe in the business, but resigning and leaving is an even bigger sign that you don't believe in the business. And once you leave, then you don't need to disclose stock sales. So it's almost like you sold all your stock.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whilst we're on the subject of the company execs, then perhaps you can give us your kind of top priority or multiple priorities when looking at boards and overall company governance.
I love that. So, you know, one of the first things I'll do if I'm looking at a public company in my research process is I'll go to this site called Insider Score. I'll type in the ticker, and I'll just look at the board members. And most companies have boards ranging from 5 to maybe at the high end 15 people. And I'll just go through each board member and see what other public companies' boards they serve on. And there's no like right or wrong way to do this or interpret it. It's just that I've noticed if you have a board that has very little experience on other public company boards, that's rare, and that tends to be a red flag. You might see that in a SPAC merger, and you might see that in a company that's not being run in the best interest of shareholders. For example, there's a bank called Amalgamated Bank. They're a union-focused bank. I think like half their board was just like union members who've never served on the board of a public company. It's like, who's the bank being run in the best interest of? The shareholders, the union, probably the union. So I look first, all the board members, see if they're serving on other public company boards. If they have no experience on other company boards, that's not a good sign. And then you want to see, do they have successful experience on other public company boards? You'd hope that if you're like investing in a company, a bunch of the board members have been board members of other successful companies. They know what greatness looks like. You know, people, I think, like, who are public market winners tend to continue to be public market winners, and public market losers continue to be public market losers. So if you see a board member and they've been on the board of 3 companies that fell 90%, even if they're in like irrelevant industries, I think that means, hey, I want to take an extra close look at you. Maybe there's something going on here in your network and your circle of people that leads you to like consistently underperform. And then in addition to looking at boards, I spend a lot of time, maybe more than anyone else, just tracking resignations. Every week in Bear Cave, I'll like manually go through the list of all the executives and board members who resign that week. It's about 300 a week. And I'll just be trying to find the most suspicious. So generally, if somebody leaves after less than 3 years, that's a problem. I'm usually like looking above $1 billion market cap. And even beyond just people resigning, which kind of seems obvious, if a CEO, a CFO resigns, that's bad. There's a lot of like context clues that I think people sometimes overlook. Resigning effective immediately is a lot worse than resigning with a year advance notice. If you resign to get a new job, that's a lot like more acceptable than resigning effective immediately to spend more time with your family. I'll try to see if there's a pattern of resignations. If a CFO resigns, that's bad, but the chief accounting officer resigned 6 months earlier, that's a lot more suspicious. I'll look at the auditor. People, you know, the PCAOB has a great site where you can type in any company name and not just see who the auditor is, but the specific audit partner and the other companies they worked on in the past. So if you have a weak auditor and the CFO is resigning and a board member or chief accounting officer resigned even a year ago effective immediately, it kind of promotes this thread that, hey, maybe there's a problem going on that the market might not be missing. There could be SEC correspondence that the market isn't looking at. And then finally, I'll try to look a lot at the past history of whoever's leaving. You know, so if you're a board member and you resigned effective immediately after 6 months, but you have no history on other public company boards, then you might have been the odd one. Maybe you weren't a fit for this board. Maybe you weren't like acting appropriately. However, if you have been on 3 public company boards for a decade and all those public companies are doing phenomenal, and then you join this small company and resign from the board after 6 months, that's a huge red flag. That's a sign that you're the adult in the room. You know what you're doing. You're the successful one, and you have some issues with this company. And I'm just amazed at how like little attention people will pay to this sometimes. Like Larry Summers, the former Secretary of the Treasury, resigned effective immediately from the board of like Square just weeks after there was an NBC News story of whistleblowers coming forward about like not non-compliance with money laundering laws. That could be like the biggest red flag ever. The guy who understands government and their approach and our laws and the importance of regulation is resigning effective immediately from a board he's been on. And then, you know, the final thing I'll do that some people don't do is I'll try to look at social media for clues. So in the Larry Summers case, Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Square, after his board member resigns, starts tweeting memes criticizing Larry Summers for resigning from the board. It's like the craziest thing. And like, so somebody using an AI tool might just see, oh, Larry Summers resigned, whatever. But if you like try to get all the context clues in the whistleblower report from NBC News and the first fact it was effective immediate, and then Jack Dorsey throwing shade on Twitter, it's a clear sign that there's major disagreement here, even though the filing will say no disagreement. And something's really, really wrong. Sometimes you'll see executives remove their experience from LinkedIn. So the former CFO of Tattoo Chef, who who resigned effective immediately. He deleted the experience from his LinkedIn, and Jeff later declared bankruptcy a year or two later. His replacement CFO went to the University of Phoenix, and I don't believe in judging people based on their universities too much, but if you went to like a for-profit online like school and now you're the CFO of a public company after the CFO just resigned effective immediately, it's like it just gives you this pattern that I think so many people don't do the work to like actually see.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess the hard part, I mean, you've talked about a lot of different signals, a lot of different information sources. One of the harder parts, I would imagine, is kind of joining that all together to form a cohesive narrative and kind of understanding how many boxes each company or prospective candidate needs to tick before they're worthy of kind of further investigation or producing a report in the bear cave. Like, is there any best practice you can talk to about, okay, this company has reached the threshold because it's done X, Y, and Z? Talk to us about that part of the process.
So one thing that makes it a little easier for me is I'm really focused on just the qualitative. I don't really like model. I don't give price targets. I don't short it myself. I really just say, this is what I'm good at and this is what I'm going to focus on, and I'll let everybody else do the rest. You subscribe to the Bear Cave, this is what you're getting. And I think it does come down to a judgment call. I really want to just see how egregious it is. So I'll read every Glassdoor review on a company. I'll read every Business Bureau complaint. I'll read every Site Job or Trustpilot complaint. And when you spend 4 hours doing that on so many different businesses, I think you do tend to get a little bit of a spidey sense, especially if you're also getting the FOIA level stuff. You obviously want to like read the SEC filings to see like, is this core to the business, or is all the complaints maybe about one irrelevant unit? I tend to stick at smaller market cap companies, like $1 to $10 billion market cap, where it's like, this isn't just one business unit, it's like the entire business. You also want to see like, does it like make sense? So with Root Auto Insurance, all the consumers were complaining about unwanted price increases, which would lead to like more underwriting profits in the state of Texas. And like they just had a surge of complaints in Texas with like unwanted price increases. And then the company on their earnings call was like, hey, in Texas, we had like great underwriting results. Our profitability went way up. This is a sign we're working it. They just didn't disclose it was all from like these nonsense price increases on consumers. So you try to see if it makes sense. And maybe like one example where it's like worked really well recently is Chegg. So with Chegg, I'm young. I was in college just a few years ago. I know a lot of people in there. It's like I just intuitively know it's kind of a dying tool with AI. You go to TikTok and there's like tons of competing products with Chegg. You read all the comments and all the students are like, I can't wait for Chegg to die. They screwed us. I hate Chegg. You go to Better Business Bureau and all the complaints are like, I'm still being billed by Chegg, even though I thought I canceled years ago. I want to cancel. It's so tough. I go through the cancellation process myself, and it's like 6 different windows to cancel. You need to go to the website, you need to go to account management, you need to click I want to cancel, and then it's like, well, do you want this benefit? No. Do you want this benefit? No. Can we do a win back? No. And then like they switch the button you need to click to continue to cancel. And on the last page, it says like, we're sorry to see you go, and you think you've canceled. Like there's one more button you need to click in order to actually cancel. So they do this intentionally, so you think you canceled, you leave, but you didn't actually finish the flow. And it's like when you do this and you do it over and you see all the complaints and you see the competitors coming in and you know that it's a product losing share, it becomes a very like intuitive process. And Chegg stock is down like 80% this year, and I published that I think January 2nd. So it doesn't always work. Occasionally I think I might fool myself into thinking issues are more serious than they are. The one big failure was the first Bear Cave article where I wrote on Celsius Holdings, the popular energy drink, and I highlighted a lot of the proof for like these outside issues, the board, the executives, whatever, but I kind of missed that the core product was extremely popular and getting more popular. So that stock was up maybe like 300-400% since the Bear Cave first article. But other than that, I don't think there's been any major failure. And I think there's been a lot of real successes. So it's just important to like make sure it's core to the business and not, I can look at the board and executives, but there needs to be something core to the business that says the business is also struggling.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I'm glad we landed on that point. That seems absolutely crucial. That's with all of that in mind. Then I think that sets the context perfectly to use the last kind of portion of the interview to talk about a particular example. I read your recent report on DeFi Technologies, so perhaps we can start by introducing the company to the listeners and the viewers. What do DeFi do? How do they make their money?
DeFi Technologies is an extremely complicated company. And if you try to figure out what they do from their website or investor presentation, I think you'd be left very confused. I was very confused. But after hours of trying to understand it, my best summary of it is they're kind of like a conglomerate with various different crypto assets. Their most valuable is a subsidiary called Valor that essentially does crypto ETFs. This is the
Yep.
meat and bones of the business. In addition to Valor, they have a bunch of direct investments in various companies and other crypto companies. They acquired a research firm from Anthony Pompliano for a little bit of stock, but the meat of it, the entire like business that investors care about, is the subsidiary called Valor, and Valor issues various ETFs for cryptocurrencies. And I think people are familiar with Bitcoin and Ethereum. Valor mainly focuses on this long tail of what are called altcoins, or kind of second tier coins, like Solana, Shift, Polkadot, Cardano, Dogecoin, Avalanche. There's this here, they all got funny names, but this huge like long tail. And right now they have like 20 or so various ETFs for these altcoins, and these ETFs have supposedly gathered a large amount of assets. And Valor makes money in two ways, charging a roughly 2% management fee on the ETF for investors to invest who don't want to buy the coin directly for whatever reason and would prefer to get an ETF outside the United States. Or they also make money with the coins they hold in the ETF, and they lend it out or stake it out to earn a lot of interest on that.
Got it. And I guess beyond the core value prop and the products that they peddle, what kind of early signs or red flags made you dig into the company and caused your initial skepticism?
So what caught my eye is, first, they were going up like crazy. I think the stock went from 10 cents to $3 in like a year. So that catches my eye. That just doesn't always feel right. And then they got a lot of social media traction. So in my longs, if I invest in a company, I like it to be unknown. I don't want anyone to know about it. But if everybody's talking about a name, and this happens all the time on fin Twitter, financial Twitter, it's almost certainly overvalued. People delude themselves and think it can go up forever. But it's like, so the fact it's getting tons of chatter and is being pushed up a ton made me a little interested. The fact it was tough to understand made me a little interested. And what else made me interested is a few days earlier, there was an article in this publication called Coin Snacks. It's a crypto publication, and they highlighted how the company had ties to some stock promotion firms. They were paying $500,000 of cash to a Gold Star Media to do email campaigns where they're like, best stock ever, buy DeFi. They, Anthony Pompliano, a crypto influencer who had ties to the firm, had published 2 articles saying that he thinks the stock is going to go a lot higher, and those were like the highest volume days for the stock, pushing the stock higher. There were some YouTube videos talking very publicly, like bullishly about the company. It seemed to have this huge retail following, and whenever I see that, I want to dig in. And basically immediately stuff started to not make sense. I just saw that the company had like a lot of ties to previous failed ventures, and that's what made me like the spidey sense go off.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you discovered that DeFi Technologies and several other companies share the same address, for example.
It's like I look up I just go to the investor deck. I look up, here's the 4 executives and 4 board members, and all I want to know is what other companies they're associated with. And I can't use my traditional tool since it's OTC and my thing doesn't work for OTC. But I go to just like SEC full text search tool. It's a free website where anybody can search all SEC filings in the last 23 years. And I just type in every executive's name, and each one is coming up with other ties to a cannabis company that fell 99%, an EV tech company that fell 99%, just all this junk. And I'm like, are the people from the gold mining, EV tech, and cannabis failures of the past all of a sudden geniuses in crypto? I don't think so. And the other thing you mentioned, and this is just so simple, is I just look at their registered address and their CEDAR filings, the Canadian SEC, and there's like a dozen other failed companies all at that address. Gold miners, just like the who's who of like, stock, what people would usually associate with stock promotion. And I'm like, I wonder what this address is. Maybe it's a huge building and there's just like big offices. And I look it up in Google Maps and it's like this tiny little shack, and like the exterior is like a trading card business that sells Pokemon cards. And I didn't mention this in the article. I just called the Pokemon card business and I'm like, hey, are there other companies in your building? And they're like, well, it's a small building, and I have heard that there's other companies here, but I don't know. And I'm like, is there a company called DeFi Technologies in your building? And they say, I've never heard that name before, but I don't know, there's people that work here. I'm like, what is this? There's the biggest hot new crypto thing, and you have no idea who they are. And it's this like small little office space that like tons of other nonsense companies use. And then you like look at the CEO, he's in Switzerland. The CFO is also the CFO of like, a clean energy company. It just doesn't pass the smell test right away. And it's like, to me, it's obvious it takes half a day of work, but to like investors, none of them like even mention it online.
Yeah, right. And I mean, even aside from those red flags that you mentioned, if you think about kind of the core product and the kind of value proposition that the company's pushing, like, do you see kind of regulation and kind of wider industry headwinds blocking their growth moving forward? Do you see it as an actual kind of viable business model?
Well, I think it depends on how credible you view management, and I don't view management as particularly credible in this case, although they say they're becoming extremely profitable. And it kind of makes sense. ETF issuance, especially if you can charge 2% of fees and lend the underlying currency out, should be a massively profitable business. Now, what they said in their like investor day that I think investors have kind of missed is they have like just a head start on the competition, but they fully expect other ETF issuers to come in for the altcoins. Now, I think there's serious regulatory and litigation risk around these altcoins. There's also like a security risk where like if people buy the ETF and you have the coins and you lose them or they're stolen, or you lend them to somebody who loses them, which everyone says will never happen, but more often than not does happen, then you have this huge like loss that's going to be needed filled by somebody. And I think the company could get in a lot of trouble there. I think they're going to need to compress fees over time. I think their whole business of lending their currency out or staking it out is really, really, really questionable. And if it's so profitable, you're just going to have competition come in and like erode away your margins. Like there's a reason people don't do this with altcoins. It's kind of seen as like nonsense. There's no reason Coinbase couldn't come out like and say, hey, in addition to people buying stuff directly on our platform, we're just going to do this ETF business if it's so beautiful, and we're going to beat up these like people who don't have, in my view, like a ton of credible experience in the industry, with their exception of their CEO, who does seem to have some crypto experience. And then like the biggest kind of red flag here is they say they're super profitable. They say there's no risk to what they do. They own their own validators, but you read the CEDAR filings, and basically all their income from the underlying ETFs where they're lending out the securities and stuff. I'm kind of wondering, who are they lending to? How can they get such a great return from lending their crypto out? And you just look in the filings, who are the people they're lending to? And it's just counterparty A, counterparty B, counterparty C, counterparty D, counterparty E, just 8 anonymous counterparties, and you have no idea who they are. And like anytime you're getting above market returns, it's probably because you're taking more risk. And if you just say, hey, we have like 8 anonymous counterparties in like Singapore and the Cayman Islands and all these odd jurisdictions, of course you're taking risk. Even if you say you own your own validators and we have best in class practices, and I like read their best in class practices, and they're like, we do adverse media searches to see if there's negative news articles on these companies. I'm like, this is very, very risky. one of Anthony Pompliano's past companies, BlockFi, that he was promoting, also was lending out crypto, but it turns out they were like lending it out to FTX's sister company, and then they needed to shut down because they have the liquidity issues. They always say there's like no risk to it, but if you just like, if there's no risk, why are your 8 counterparties anonymous? If there's no risk, how are you earning above market returns? It's just not adding up at all.
Yeah, completely. I think I want to finish then on a question that's just simply, what further research or investigations do you plan, if any, to conduct on DeFi technologies? But I think that's a wider question in terms of the companies that you initially profile and spotlight. Do you then continue to track those companies and revisit them? I've seen that in your newsletter a couple of times, but how do you distinguish between the ones that you track long term and the ones that you let go?
So let me answer your first question about DeFi first and your broader question second. DeFi, I'm probably not going to do too much more on them. They're very small. I think they were $500 million when I wrote on them.
Yeah.
Now they're 300 million USD. They're a little illiquid. They're a little smaller than I like to go for. I think it's I've said my part. In terms of further research, I'd be a little curious who the counterparties are. Sometimes when I write on these companies, it's like if they fall, but then they rise back up a ton later, maybe I'd write on them again. But I tend to, especially with the smaller companies, let it play out. Now, to your broader point, do I want to continue working on a company or do I just move on? And in many cases, I just write one article and move on. In some cases, I continue to write. So a lot of things drive that decision. First, litigation risk. I think, I've never been sued. I've only got a cease and desist once. Care.com went after me a little, but they never sued me. The newsletter is profitable. I could maybe afford one lawsuit, but I'd rather not spend the next 2 years of my life and millions of dollars hiring lawyers and doing all this nonsense. So I think one way you avoid litigation is be understated, stick to the facts, show the evidence, show, don't tell, don't give price targets, don't short, don't take positions, but also write your article and then move on. I don't think anybody's ever going to sue you if you write your article and move on, and people will look it up and people might put out a statement saying, oh, we disagree with it, but that's not going to get you in trouble. Where you typically get, problems are if you go after someone for years and years and years, like you see Mark Cahotas do this. I'm going to send the CEO to jail. The CEO is going to go to prison. Even if you're completely right, they're obviously going to fight back. And the fact that they're powerful and successful means they have the resources and some sort of persuasive ability to go back after you. So I never want to kind of have that reputation of I'm looking to destroy your life. I'm just looking to do my research, share my article, and let the market and the winds of our universe flow and maybe shift it a little more in the right direction. And sometimes, there's the exception to that rule where generally if it's a bigger company and I feel like the issues are really egregious and harmful to society, I will continue writing on them. Roblox is a great example where I think Roblox is a huge facilitator of child abuse and is just not doing the jobs they need to do to prevent sex offenders from using the platform to meet kids. That has a huge public interest component, which makes me want to write on it more. Sometimes if I get a lot of positive feedback after a first article, I'll want to write on it more. Sometimes if I write an article, I'll think it's a nothing burger, and then just people out of the woodwork will start reaching out to me. Oh my gosh, you just scratched the surface. There's all these other issues. Planet Fitness was like that. So then I might want to write more. So if it's bigger, if it's liquid, if it has interest to the readership, and I have something more to add, then I'll want to write more. And also, I kind of commit with the Bear Cave to publishing twice a month on the first and third Thursday of the month. If I don't have anything new to write about, it's a lot easier to just go back to an old company, and I track some of them and, just kind of write an update. And that's one way I can keep a strict publishing schedule while also never putting out something that I don't believe in, is revisiting it. And I do try to track the old names. So like one company I wrote on that I'm very bullet bearish on is EXP Realty. They're like a cloud brokerage. So they take all the costs out of the brokerage model. They have brokers who typically sell $200,000 to $400,000 homes. And there's a bunch of ethics issues with them, management turnover. I don't think their model works. They partner with Grant Cardone. They're like MLM-like, and they focus a lot on recruiting. And I think the model's turned where they had 20 straight quarters of growing agents and now 2 quarters of declining. And people don't realize they actually have their agent count publicly disclosed on one of their websites, where like every day the website updates and shows the number of active US agents on their site, and you can search it. And every day I have a tool that just like emails me a screenshot of that website so I can see the agent count going down every day. And anytime I see a bad week or a bad month with this agent count, part of me is tempted to write an update saying, hey, this is bad. And then like one week there is going to be like a really bad week, they lose a lot of agents, and I'll be able to first person to bring that to the market and say, look, here's a chart of the daily agent count, and this is why this company's struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating. And for anyone that isn't already subscribed to the Bear Cave to track all of that stuff, we'll put a link in the episode description. Another fascinating conversation. I think we could go on for another half an hour or so, but let's end it there. Already looking to the 4th installment, if you'll come back on the show.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, thank you very much again, Edwin. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely, Hayden. Thank you so much for having me.